Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, great. Let's see what we have. Okay, okay, okay. So, since this was quite impromptu and not much prepared, so I'll prepare remarks as we go for the interview process. Um, so, hello everyone. Um, this will be an example interview, a mock interview. Um, and you might ask yourself, how am I qualified for this, or how do I know? Well, it so happened that over this last week I had 4 job interviews to give for interns. Interns for software engineer in .NET position. So it's quite useful and quite perfect that you also needed the such help. Um, so I'll try to guide you through the main parts that the job interview has and give some tips and remarks. So are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. First, before we start, actually, I'll find it naturally as we go through an interview. So the first part is a company will talk about itself. They will generally introduce what they do. Um, so um, they will talk about the products they're working on, roughly about area they work in. Um, they will talk about other people, what kind of people are working in their company. So, for example, they could talk about that they are some big company which deals with logistics for trucks and ensures that they travel on time, provides them information on traffics, on orders they need to deliver and so on and so forth. And they will talk about how a developer helps, that they communicate with the business people and help deliver small solutions, embedded into trucks or something like that. Uh, as an example. So this part you don't really need to care much. So all you need to care about is maybe ask 1 or 2 questions. So before you come to an interview, it would be nice if you read about the company you're applying for and ask a question or two about what they do.
Question like technical or just maybe some.
In terms of business, so basically show interest, that you don't just come for money, that you don't just want to get experience, but you're genuinely interested into what they're doing. So if we talk about trucks, you can ask like how big is the company, how many customers do they have, how many trucks are at their disposal. uh, it can be anything, or even a funny remark, but it would be ideal if you ask 1 or 2 questions to show interest, not just be silent.
Okay, get it. Then.
They will probably ask before we start the next part if you have any questions, and then you can ask. Um,
Okay. So if this an outsourced company that not make their own product and
mhm.
They make products for others.
Yes. So you could ask something like, okay, what countries are your customers? Or what areas do you work in? If it's that vague, if they outsource developers or teams, because I had similar experience. So there is
Okay,
still,
okay.
like you said, uh, you could ask about technologies as well, like in general, what technologies are used. Um, so this is also kind of a check um, if this place is the right fit for you. So if you're unsure before you go if it is a good place for you, you should ask questions like that. Uh, so we have one more question from Lubenik 4. Um, so he says, sorry for interrupt, but I have a question that you can answer at the end. Most companies, at least in my country, are looking for people that are culture fit for their. Do they know if we are uh, I don't understand the question. It would be nice to clarify. So, anyways, part one is quite simple. It just they're talking completely, not asking you any questions, and you can ask a question if you want to. Ideally, you do 1 or 2 questions. Um, it takes usually 10 minutes for the first part. If
Mm-hmm.
the whole interview usually is 1.5 hours, do you know how much time will your interview take?
Actually, I don't, but I think it's yeah, half hour maybe.
Half an hour only, you think?
Yeah, I think it's just classic conversation because I already passed the test that they give to me. So I think it's just hello, hello. We are the company, and what you can say about yourself.
Okay. So this is a second interview already. Oh,
We didn't have the first one. It
mm,
was just the conversation in the mail. So we talked about. They
mm-hmm.
told me about the technologies, their company, and others. Give me their test, so I passed it, and they invite me to the interview. It
Yes.
it it were a remote offer, so it's not no it will be in the Skype.
Mm-hmm. So it just might be, a filtering process. So they might have many applicants. So they filter out the ones who can't even do homework. And since you passed that, this is the second interview. Uh, did they say anything? What is going to happen in the interview?
No, they said it just a conversation about we want to know about you as our employee, what you can do, what you are as people.
Did you ask specifically about if it's going to be technical?
They said no, maybe a few questions, small questions,
Okay,
not a hard touch interview.
okay. So the flow can vary from country to country, from company to company. Probably more company to company than country to country. Um, I had experience where it would be several, not several, but a few interviews. First one like on a phone with simple tech questions with problem solving, and then another one would follow where they take you to whiteboard to do some problem solving, more advanced as you talk and actually give solutions with code, pseudocode. And then third one would be when you do it uh, with the boss, when you talk with the boss in terms of soft skills. So it can have multiple parts during multiple days. So but mostly the interviews I've been are just 1 day interviews. You come, usually takes 1.5 hours, and you are being tested across all areas. So this is the kind of interview um, I'll take you through, even though just the second part is probably the most important one for you specifically, because that's the part that they will be testing you tomorrow. Not tomorrow, but the day you come.
Okay.
So this part is tell me about yourself part. So after they're done talking about themselves, they will start asking you to do the same about yourself. So you should prepare like a few minutes monologue about what you do. So yourself. So talk about what education do you have? What experience? What background are you coming from? Like, that's a bad question. What do you like? What are your hobbies, more like?
Okay.
Hobbies, interests. How do you keep up to date with technology? And experience. And that's pretty much it that you tell about yourself. And this will be followed by questions. And then they will ask you questions. After you're done talking, if they didn't hear something, and they probably didn't, they'll ask you questions that are important for team. If you're a good fit for a team, they'll ask you something like how do you solve. So they'll ask you about how much experience do you have working in teamwork. So we can now talk about this part. So can you tell us about yourself?
Okay, so I start, right?
Yes.
Okay, so my name is Vitaly. I'm 25. I'm from Ukraine. I'm born here and live here whole life. I'm married. I have 2 children, and that's kind of classic story about me. I'm like the computers from my childhood, where of course I play the games and I want to make a games like many other people. So that's in that situation I choose my profession maybe, but I can't make my study in university because of situation in my life, and I can't spend my student time to the actual students and study the things that I want. I must find the job as fast as possible and make money. But I want to work with nearly IT, so I goes to my first job, and that's a place where I'm working for now. It was a local internet provider where I works as tech support. We support and set up devices for providers, switches, commutators, routers, others. And in a year or two, I grows up as tech support, and I have a lot of free time for myself because I learned my routine tasks perfectly, and I have much time to spend for myself. And I'm starting to study the programming actually. First, I choose Java, but my friend who learns C# in university call me to C#, and I start learning it. Now I have learned data science maybe 3 years, and I have a bunch of pet projects, but the most I liked it was actual the program which I used and my colleagues used for the day. It was a small and simple app, which console app, where the program is connecting to the device, parsing new devices, give it to user. User choose the device he want to set up, give it a name, and programs automatically set up the device. Uh, Maybe the year or 2 years, I start learning ASP.NET Framework, and after ASP.NET Core as platform. That's and I have a task for me what I want to do, and I actually do on my work. It app which web app which use Google Maps to print house, apartments, and our boxes for devices, which is connects directly to itself, and it's custom marker where you can click and give information about our house or client or device or other things, which we can freely add and remove from that. And that's my one web app, which actual is commerce experience, and and so on.
All right, that's nice. So now I'll interrupt. After you talk about this, they will go on with questions to verify if what you said is really. Well, they will ask you questions, and they will ask you questions about yourself, about technology, about still personal things, about nothing technical yet. But they will also ask it in a way to verify stuff that you already told. And if you fail to verify it, it will really be a bad.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
clearly understand.
yeah. So now go back to interview. So do you see my stream, by the way?
Actually, I don't.
Okay.
No, but now I looking for chat and
Okay. So just don't have voice, audio, and all good. Um, so I made notes from all you said, and all the relevant info from what you said is in those notes, at least in my opinion. So you mentioned that you like playing games on computers, right?
yeah, of course.
So could you tell me where do you look for? What channels do you follow? For what blogs do you read for technology or for computers, for games? Can you tell more about that?
Okay, so mostly I read Reddit or the chats on Telegram. That's where information give to me. So in Reddit, it's C Sharp, few C Sharp
Mm-hmm.
boards, League of Legends board, of course,
Mm-hmm.
Path of Exile, Apex Legends, and few funny memes board.
All right. So back to C sharp. Could you do you remember the last thing that interested you the most from the C sharp Reddit? What was the most interesting post that you last read?
Yeah. That was posted on C Sharp, learning C Sharp, or just general C Sharp, about the Blazor lib for UI with
Mm-hmm.
common CSS Bootstrap and other things. It's cool. It's really cool. Looks like, and I like it. I read.
Mm-hmm. All right. So back to university, you mentioned that you didn't really have any formal education.
Yeah, I made a few. bad decision in my.
But you mentioned that you started working quite early, right?
Yeah, like 18 maybe.
So um, while you were working, I didn't quite pick it. When did the interest for programming happen? When did you start being interested in programming? And also during your work, how much teamwork did you have there? Were you working more of a solo person, or did you have a team experience?
A few steps aside, we talk about it with them on the mail. I said to them that I don't have really team experience as team member in development, and all my projects will be made
But
by myself.
but at work, at your normal daily work that you started early on, like overall, your work experience as a team member, regardless of it being a development experience or not, how much of it do you have?
Oh, it's 6 years now.
So all this time you've been a team player, like working in a
Yeah,
team.
yeah. We have a team for tech support in our company.
So what problems? What are the most common problems that you faced in a team? What do you think are the most common problems when you were working in a team?
I think I think it's impatience for me. I mean, we have much tasks per day in some situations, and I can be really bad at this point because if someone make mistakes, I can blame no push it too hard for the common way, and it's bad. And over time, I take patience for it, and now I hope I fix the problem. But sometimes in some situations, I can be really impatient.
And how does that affect the team, your impatience?
I blame them. I blame them for their mistakes.
All right.
And
Now,
that's not the best way to fix actual problem. And over time, I know it. I
all right. So now I'll be back to third person perspective and comment on what you said. What you said is not the best thing. It's quite actually bad to say that you blame them for their mistakes because, I mean, it's like you basically tell them directly about your drawback. So you might you probably realize that it might not be a good thing from a third
yeah.
person perspective. So you should either try to say it differently so that it doesn't sound as bad. Because I personally wouldn't like a person who blames others um, uh, in the team, or like that person would not be like my top choice. So
Yeah, I get it. It's not that hard as maybe it's looked like, because I'm again not native speaker, and
yeah,
maybe I say it like too hard.
yeah,
It's not like I'm screaming out at the whole floor of for building at them or like other, but they I see the ways I can deal with it better, and I can communicate with them better to faster improve.
yes. So you should try. So the problem with the with what you said is probably not the point you're trying to make, but how you made it. Like from what you said, I picked somehow the part that you blamed someone first. So maybe you should have went it from the other way, that you do stuff faster in advance. You're impatient for that reason because you have to wait for others, uh, and and then I don't know. You should put it differently because saying it directly that you blame other people is quite a negative thing. Maybe you should put it in a way that you, I don't know, instead of saying that you blame people, you say that you're impatient and thus you make suggestions to the team. That sounds much better, right? Like instead of
Okay,
saying
okay.
that you
I think
blame them.
about it since.
Yeah. So just try to think how to say this in a non-negative way, in a better way, because blaming other people is just a bad sentence for a job interview.
Yeah, okay, get it.
Yes. So try to. I'll put this notes. Try to put your drawbacks as not so direct things. That's also a good thing, as Erlington said. Maybe you could try to say that you try to take lead on things. I mean, that's a positive thing, taking a lead. But if you say you blame people, that's a negative thing. So just say the same thing in different words and you'll be good.
Okay, thanks.
Um, so questions. So first question is about teamwork. How do you feel as a team player? What's your role? We answered that. Then the second question usually goes, how do you solve compromises? So now let's go back to the interview, and now I ask you, how do you solve compromises? What happens? What do you do when you have a problem? When you have a different a branch of opinions, when two people think differently, how do you come to a compromise?
Okay, in most common way, I just talk with them and talk with our lead. Now, okay, just now I am actually the lead of tech support, one of them. But when I was a part of team, just a common team member, we always just go for our lead and give them our opinions and try to make a conversation and just dialogue where we can find a better solution. Or even if I don't think it's better, I can apply it. Okay.
So let's say two people come to you with both good solutions. Which solution do you pick? How do you pick a better solution? How do you know which solution is better?
Just think about solutions. What I like more, that's a way.
How do you measure what you like more?
Uh, there was a common way to work with our tasks, work with our setups, and if solution, which solution is better fit up for that common practice, that's one.
Could you tell us more about the solution that you're talking about? Common way of solving such problems?
Oh, of course, it's just common security things. No, okay. If we talk about my job now, so it's about setup devices for networking. There's a common practice about security, about optimization, about quality of service, and others, which is recommended by default. So the solution which fit better for this common practice is one.
What if it's a legit option, like sometimes, and especially in programming, there are different ways how you can solve the same problem, and those different ways are actually multiple ways are applicable to the same solution. So how do you pick that? And especially as a programmer, as a developer, how do you pick a better solution? How do you how do you measure it? Which one is
Okay,
better?
if I have a time, which about half hour, I'm trying to search about which solution uses in community, and like many times, that's come which more deep detailization about the solution each solution in an internet, which describes pros and cons for each other. And teaching the other experience, I made the decision which if again they equivalent in depth level, I just I don't know, make pick a coin and throw it.
All right. So now back from a third person perspective, what I was actually expecting you to say is that you try to. The keywords that I was expecting were kind of missing. I was expecting you to say on measuring pros and cons. I was expecting those two things, those two words, pros and cons. Like you measure what's good and bad about the situation, and just if both things are good, you take the one that just by comparison has less cons and more pros compared to the other one. And that's a very general way to put it, but that's what I would expect for the answer to be. And a compromise, the context was teamwork, as according to Bo said. So the context is teamwork, and I expect you to talk about teamwork. Compromises in a teamwork. So you went a bit off the rails. Probably I also put you a bit off the rails. And when I asked you about teamwork and programming, I was still referring to teamwork experience. Like, let's say two developers have different opinions, and how do you pick one solution from two different developer opinions? And the answer I would give is by measuring pros and cons and not and choosing not the perfect solution, but the one that is fitting better for the current situation. I think that would be a slight better answer. But this is not a bad answer what you did. I mean, it would probably be follow up with different questions to just guide you to a direction. But I kind of heard what I wanted to hear, so it's okay. So about yourself, you'll be asked about teamwork, about compromises, solving conflicts, and about how do you keep up to date. And you kind of said that about Reddit channel. Do you read any more channels? Are you interested?
One.
Other than Reddit channel, what else do you use to keep up to date with technology?
It's Telegram. Telegram has many channels, tech and specific.
Mm-hmm.
In Telegram, I got many channels, quite a bit. It was a channel with developers, with my work and stuff, and channels just with news from high tech, maybe video game.
Mm-hmm. I see. So now let's go back to the interview. So could you tell me, how do you do estimates? How do you measure how much time is needed for you to do work, programming, for example, or not programming?
Can you please repeat the question? Because
yes. How do you measure how much time will be needed to do work, like programming task? How much time will be needed to develop an application or to implement a feature? How do you measure that time?
Between relaxing and working, right?
More about work, but it doesn't really matter. So let's say I ask you to create an app with a database and for managing records about students and display that in a website. And how would you measure time that it would take for such a task? If you have a specific requirement to do a task, how do you estimate it?
I tried. Let me think about it.
Yes, this is a very common, like you'll probably be asked, like 90% they will ask you this question. So you should know, be ready.
And that's where I get stuck, because I can't really understand what you asking me. How much time I need to develop a specific app, or
How do you plan?
plan? Okay, I take the whole task for me, and I try to split smaller things, and I
Okay.
split it in after it was I split it in uh, that way that I can split it more. And after that, I just make step by step, making this simple one splitting steps and making it just like that.
Okay, and how do you measure how much time will each step take or the whole project?
Just okay, if it's a more complicated task for me, I give it an unknown state. No, I take a simple steps which I know how much time it will take for me. But if I didn't know how to realize that feature that I didn't realize before, that I can say how much time I can spend on it.
So if your boss comes to you and says, "Do me this task," and by the end of the day, I would like to know how much time will you take. Um, so what will you say to him? Will you say, "I don't know," or will you try
it
to?
it's hard to answer
Mm-hmm.
because if it was a real task, I can say, so I can measure. I try to look in for solutions to realize a feature, and I can probably say the time. But if it's abstract feature, which I don't know how to realize it, I can say I spend some time to research how to realize it, and after the research, I can say the time.
Um, so short answer would be you would research it on the internet based on other people's experience, and so okay, you find on the internet that uh, that the task takes 5 hours to complete. Let's say setting up a database with a simple create, update, read, delete
Yeah, it's common
for
task. I know
yeah.
how much time I can spend on it, so it's not complicated. I mean, if is a task was too complicated for me, and I even don't know how to make it, I need to a bit of time to research and knowing that.
But okay, let's say you find a task, like you find the solution on the internet roughly, and it says it will take you 5 hours roughly. So will you say 5 hours to your boss? Or what number will you
Uh,
give to your boss?
no, I probably take a few time for me to. If I didn't experience in that, I take a bit of time for myself, for deeply in term in the specific task.
Right. Well, okay, now let's go back to third person commentary. So the way I would answer this question is that estimates are inaccurate and they are bound to just be an estimate in the end, so don't expect an accurate time. But if you do have to estimate, base it on your experience, on initial research, and ideally on a tiny proof of concept for a very simplified solution for a more complex problem, so that even a complex problem could be better estimated if you understand how it needs to be done in the most simple way possible, and then you can make
Yeah,
it
yeah.
applicable to your
I
own
mean,
scenario. Mm-hmm.
I get it. I mean, if I can split a task much more, because I don't know how to split it, because I don't know how to build it. Uh, there, I can give you an answer how much time is.
Yes, and another thing that I would say as a general rule of thumb for things that you haven't worked with, put x4 modifier times 4 modifier for time. So if you would say on internet it takes 5 hours, say it will take 20 hours for you. It's much
20?
yes 20 because it's much better um, to be saying a number that will be more time than you actually need than a number that will be less time than you actually need. Because if an expert says 5 hours, you are on a risk of not
Yeah,
fitting in
yeah.
a time.
I know that, and I think about maybe 10 hour, but I think it's come on, it's too much.
Yes, but 5 hours is a lot of time already, and for a beginner, it really might go off the rails, and it's hard.
Yeah, yeah. If it's hard task for experts, which takes 5 hours, so it's probably
Right. Okay. Let's go back to interview. What estimation techniques do you know? Do you know any estimation techniques? How do you estimate as a team if you gather up all together and talk about tasks that need to be done? Do you do that at work?
okay. I I didn't have much team experience, so I can't directly answer on the question. But
Okay.
if it by myself, yeah,
Have you heard about Agile?
yeah, yeah, agile, yeah.
So can you tell me more about Agile?
Okay, as I know, agile use technique. It gives you a task. Yeah, you need to build an app for some company, for example. Then they split it to a big legends, which represent own functional realization, which is to which ah, okay. Let me a minute. I need English boost.
Okay, no worries. Also, if you're not sure about answers of if you really know what you're talking about, it's better to just say that you. It's not good to say that you don't know, but you can say you're not that
But
familiar with it.
I read about Scrum. They split task about
Yeah,
at Legends. Legends split in tasks.
yeah,
Tasks put in together to a split, right? Split.
yes,
And yeah, which week or 2 weeks, small time
yes,
amount,
yes.
and they do the task and other. But I can't say it like on my native language.
Okay, that's good enough. What um, usually Agile has a board called Kanban board, which
Yeah,
has
yeah,
columns to move tasks around. Can you tell me
yeah.
about those columns?
As I know, there are a bunch of the type of the bars, and
Mm-hmm.
they can have different column numbers and
For
describes
example,
for
specific example.
okay, column for work to
Mm-hmm.
work.
Mm-hmm.
That's a feature
Mm-hmm.
you need to realize. Then, if you take it for yourself, you put this to column in the work.
Yes.
That
Okay.
means you actually take it in and you work it. When
Yes.
you end the work, you give it to testers and put it on testing.
Yes.
If tester committed, he put it on production or other type column where is committed, it's fine. Feature is realized, testers is committed, and all good. Or he can give it to you back for fixing some bugs or others.
Yes, that's correct. So that will be about it, and this part will take about 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, I'm not sure, roughly that much time. And they will focus on questions about you as a person, as a character, and how do you fit in a team, how do you solve, how do you reach compromises, how do you estimate stuff, and how do you imagine yourself as a team player. Oh, and one more thing, right? I forgot an important bit. So, what do you expect from your current work position? What are your expectations from the position you're applying for?
Okay. I really want to try be a team member. I want to try team develop, and I want to try to work in company which is working with software development, because I don't really have that experience, and I want to improve yourself, myself in development. I want to develop apps as my routine job, and that looks like that.
All right. So after this, you'll move on to technical questions, and this part is the, I would say, most intimidating, most scary, and it can mess up. Like you could potentially mess it up the most. And
Mm-hmm.
it will be of two parts. It will be about just general programming questions about fundamentals. And then,
Mm-hmm.
so fundamental questions will basically be applicable across programming in general. So regardless of the technology you use at work, but then they will ask you questions about specific stuff, specific technologies that they used in job description, like in your
Like
case,
frameworks
yes,
or
yes,
libraries. Okay, can get.
yes, like Angular, like MVC, Web API, and so on and so forth. So let's start this part, shall we?
Okay.
So, can you tell me a difference between a list versus dictionary? What's the difference between a list and a dictionary?
Okay. List is just list. It's have data and the reference on the next member in the list. And dictionary has a key uh, across the data. So the specific key, which can be not a number, not an indexer. It will be indexer, but it's not a number.
Can it be a number?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So when would you use a list? Could you give an example of when would you use a list over dictionary, and when would you use a dictionary over list?
Okay, so if I need a custom key and it's custom key, not a number, let's say a string, I choose dictionary. List works better. It's faster than dictionary, but if I need a specific key and I want to use this case with the data, I use dictionary.
Okay, so now I'll go back as third person commenter. So your answer, it wasn't that correct. Dictionary is actually faster because it's hash set based. So some keyword is missing about dictionary, that it's hash set under the hood, and it's faster than list for this reason. So
Even
diction,
if it's let's say object or some value.
yes, yes, it's
Oh
faster
my.
than a list. And a dictionary is used for, uh, well, you should say an example problem that you would use dictionary for. Um, so if you don't know such problem, you should look for it. An example could be eliminating many if statements with key value pairs. For example, if you say something like, if value equals 1, you return this value. If value equals 3, you return this value. If value equals 10, you return this value. This can be done in dictionary. Another example would be for finding repeating letters in a sentence. For example, if I asked you to find a letter that repeats the most amount of times in a string, dictionary is a nice solution, easy solution for solving this problem, because your key would be a character and value would be
How much time?
yes, and a list in general, you said that it refers to the next element, and that kind of is not true. Like if you say that, to me it sounds like you're talking about linked list and not list. So list in general is a lot like array, except that it can be expanding. You can remove and add elements to it.
Oh, okay.
So those are the things that I would expect you to say, and this is very fundamental, and you should know those two very well. And on top of that, you should know array as well. Like, why is array not so used in C Sharp? Why is list way more dominating compared to array? You should also know the answer. And the answer is because collections usually expand and shrink. The question, do lists keep insertion order? Yes, it does. There are methods in the list like insert, insert at, and you can insert an element at a specific position, but if you just add, then
just add odds at the end of the
at
list.
the end, yes, but it will be always at the end. Yeah. Okay, so that's the first question, and it depends now on the interviewer. If they are nice, they will take in consideration how you answer this question, and since you didn't answer it perfectly, they will follow up with similar level or even easier question. So I'm going back to an interview. So now I'll ask you, okay, so now in the interview, could you tell me about what do you know about object-oriented programming?
Okay, so it's basic for C Sharp. It's development style which includes three paradigms: encapsulation, inheritation, and polymorphism.
Is it free, really?
Yeah.
There is one more.
Hidden implementation. I learned it's only three must have for all.
Yes. Okay. So can you tell me about encapsulation? What can you tell me about encapsulation? What is it?
Okay, the paradigm say it's allow us to store the data, fields or others values with the methods to work with them in one place. In C Sharp, it's
Mm-hmm. And
encapsulation is nearly with hidden implementation, but it's not.
mm-hmm. What access modifiers do you know?
Public, private, protected, internal, private, protected.
Okay. Oh wait, private protected, you said?
sorry, internal protected.
Okay. So what's the difference between protected and internal protected?
Okay, protected, it's about it can be accessed from the derived class, and internal protected is from the same assembly and types.
So if I have two projects, project A and project B, and in project A I have internal method in internal class called class A internal void do, is internal void do accessible from project B?
And the names different namespace then can be accessible.
It cannot.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Can you tell me what is polymorphism?
Okay, it's ability to call the object by link to its base class.
Mm-hmm. And can you give me an example in C sharp? How would that look like? Polymorphism
Okay.
example.
Of course, you say you have a class person, and you have a class employee and client. They both inherit a person, and you can create a link person and store in it a client or employee object. and
Yeah.
you can use all the methods or the data which describe in person class and it use the data from the object actual in employee or client which stores.
So let's say both employee and customer have method talk, which comes from person class. So could you illustrate how polymorphism happens by using that method?
A virtual method, right?
It's up to you for implementation details. I'd like to know what would you do to.
Okay, they overwrite this method because it was virtual and they overwrite. And when you create person new employee and call person say something, it says hi employee. And if you create person new customer, it's and call the method talk something, it talk about I'm customer.
So can I store an employer and a customer in the same array, for example?
If it was array of persons, of course.
All right, and can I do a loop and call method say for each element of person array?
Yeah, of course.
And what is that in terms
For
of paradigms, OP paradigms?
polymorphism.
Yes. Okay, so now I'll go back to third person perspective and comment on your answer. For polymorphism, you answered it quite correctly, I'd say. But the problem was that you talked about virtual. So virtual isn't really a necessity for polymorphism to happen. I mean, if you call something from a base class, if you call something that exists in an abstraction let's say, customer and uh, employer share the same abstraction, person. So if you call anything from that abstraction when it's
And I mean, in
yeah.
case if it's C sharp and it isn't abstraction, it has a typed described function in base class. It's fully implemented.
Yeah, so
And if
virtual
you
is not
didn't,
needed. Virtual is not needed.
I mean, you need to override the base class function.
You don't have to. It gets inherited.
But if you want to change the behavior of the,
Yes, but that wasn't in the requirements, not in the question.
oh, okay, okay.
So be careful adding those extra remarks because, well, I could follow up with a question why virtual method, but I didn't. So this would be a little minus to you because you said an extra thing that wasn't asked, and it might seem, which it did to me, that you couple polymorphism with virtual methods because that's the words you used when you explained.
Okay.
And then I would also, for perfect answer, expect you to talk about either inheritance or implementing interface methods, like that polymorphism can also be achieved with interfaces and not just inheritance.
But wait, we can use polymorphisms without interfaces.
Yes, but I mean, it's another way to achieve it. And in your answer, you should
Okay.
also
Yeah, yeah.
mention,
Most common uses, of course, it's interface.
yes. Um, and what else? I asked for the pillars of OP, and you mentioned three of them, and they're actually four. The four form being abstraction. Abstraction is another pillar. But actually, when I gave lessons myself, like a year ago, I myself said that there are only three pillars, and fourth one is just a unification of the other three. But be careful the way you say it because there are four pillars, and by
Oh, okay.
saying that there are only three, you are not being entirely correct. Abstraction is basically a way to design stuff, a way to hide some things, to expose some things, and a way to design how your uh, classes will react to one another and how uh, your interfaces will look like. So abstraction is like a public face that you expose to the rest of your application. That's abstraction in my eyes, and this is very similar to what encapsulation is. But encapsulation is just raw data put in a class and coupled with methods and encapsulated in a class. That's just encapsulation. Abstraction is your decisions, which data you expose and which data you hide, and what do you keep
Like
as an
access
interface.
modifiers.
Um, that's encapsulation. When you talk about access modifiers, that's encapsulation.
But I read about encapsulation that access modifier is not strict to it. It's
It's not only access modifier; it's also putting the right methods with the right class. So it's both things.
okay.
It's visibility and it's choices what you put in the class. Um, next, so we move on, and then eventually I will ask you. They will ask you about solid probably. So have you heard about solid principles?
Yeah, yeah. I heard. I read about it.
Okay, can you choose one solid principle and explain it? Any solid principle.
Okay. Let's try the simplest. It's the single responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
They said it's there's need to only one uh, you again English problem. Wait a bit. Your class should do only one thing, and you should not make a huge fat classes which defines and which applies to many other not similar things.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's hard to me to describe.
Right. And how do you? What's the best remedy for solving? For implementing this principle? For example, if you have uh, a fat class, what do you do to make it
Ju-
conform to single responsibility?
I split it on a bunch of class which do things allied to its what they supposed.
Sorry, could you repeat?
Yeah. If I have one fat class which uses in many of parts of program, I split it on a separate class. I split the functionality of this class on a separate class.
Mm-hmm. And how do you know that you split enough, or yeah, how do you know that you split enough? When do you stop? At what point do you stop splitting?
That's depends on the class and program. What I want to do with this class. I want to do with this class only one thing, which is the class described. Okay, if it's writer, I want to write with this class and nothing else.
Okay. So in, for example, C Sharp, we have a file class, and file class has static methods like write all text or read all text. What do you think is, well, so you said you would like writer to write and reader to read, but file does both things. Is this a violation of single responsibility?
Okay, can you repeat it please again because I didn't hear.
So in C Sharp, we have a file class, right?
Yeah.
And in file class, we have a bunch of methods, but specifically, we have two very different methods: write all text and read all text.
But
So,
it's
write,
it's
yes, go
it
on.
still applies to a file. If I want to work with file and I know I want to read from a file or I want to write to a file, it's still fine in my head.
Okay, but you said before that a reader should read and writer should write, right?
Uh, Again, it was an example. If I have an if I want to use just reader and I didn't write at my program anything else, so yeah, I didn't want to have writer in my file. But and again, I make a class reader which only reads data from file, for example, file reader of class, and its class should only read.
Yes. So now I'll go as a third person again and comment on your answer. The key part here about single responsibility is that we don't want to mix levels of abstraction. And what that means is that if I have a class, a very high level class like file, that means, like other people noted, that a file has a reader and a file has a writer. And that still doesn't break any responsibilities of a file. It's still a file. But now, where you implement reading and writing, that's the key part. You shouldn't implement reading in file. You should call reading from reader.
Oh, okay, I get it. You mean
Yes.
stored in file, but their own class which actually
Yes, you divide it in responsibilities, like the lower
yeah,
level
yeah, yeah.
responsibilities and in the lower level component, and higher level component simply references those responsibilities.
I want to mention my example from a car where I have a car, but inside the car I have other things like engine and others. And engine actually work, but a car by themselves don't care. They have engine do their work. And if I want to uh, turn on engine, I call a car and call a car turn on engine, and then car actual inside the method called an engine and call it to turn it on.
Yes. Yes, so this is the explanation I would expect. Like each component should have its own responsibilities, and if I ask you about a file, I would expect you to name those two components, reader and
I
writer.
want to mention that example, but I struggle with English and
But
try to.
you could give an example with a car, and that's probably even more difficult example. So it's okay. I mean, I would accept this answer, so it's okay. Um, all right. Um, Back to interview. So um, it's very important to have uh, programming to an interface and have loosely coupled classes. So how do we implement programming to an interface rather than programming to an implementation? Can you give an example or maybe a principle that defines how it should be done or how it explains it?
It's hard to me to understand the question.
So we program to an interface
Mhm.
and not to an implementation. So which principle explains or defines such programming relations, such paradigm? Or can you give an example? What does it mean? How is it called?
From Solid,
Yes.
uh, dependency injection, I think.
Yes, and what's the principle called?
I can't remember the actual name for the principle.
Mm-hmm. Um, so dependency inversion principle.
Yeah, right. Injection, of course. Why injection inverse?
So what gets inversed? Can you explain the principle? What does it say?
It says you should split the. Mm, uh, no. Wait a bit. I need to build the sequence.
Uh,
Okay, if you have a higher level, they should not depend on lower levels, and that's where you use the interfaces. So you say you uh, describe a basic interface with which should describe a bunch of functionality, but it not stores the functionality itself, and then you implement the functionality in derived classes, and you give it to higher level, just into no polymorphism in action. So
Okay.
you give it an interface type, which higher classes didn't know and didn't want to know how it implements on lower layers. So they call functionality from interface, and lower layers defined which is functionality.
All right. Close enough. And how do you? What's the practical value of it? What if we don't use solid? Like,
Okay, it's
the
good question. We use it is in dependency injection itself. So let's say you have domain model layer where you define all about the models. So data type and like where you store it, database files, other things, and you can have a few storage for this data. And business application layer actual don't need to know about how data stored he want to work with, and when it requested, for example, is repository. Uh, Wait a bit, I word. I'm trying to find the word. When the upper layers request the data, they request it from interface, and they actually don't know and don't need to know how this interface or how the class which derives it interface give it to data to them. And you give from lower layer to upper just abstraction, which they can use. And you in your application can swap the realization on lower layers, and you don't need to modify your upper layers.
okay. So what problems happen if I don't use an interface and if I don't need to swap anything right now?
It makes a hard wait a bit, I'm looking forward.
Okay.
It makes a strong connectivity between your upper and lower layers. If you change something in lower layers, you need to update your upper layers too.
But if I wanted to register a different implementation, I would need to change the upper layer too to register a different
You actually
implementation.
don't. You only give them the abstraction with no change in self.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you want to store in database your data, and after a few years you want to store it in a files.
Mm-hmm.
So you write a new implementation of your abstraction, which is store data in file, and still your upper layer, when he requests the data, he requests the same abstraction, and it gives the same answer for him. You didn't change anything for upper layer.
All right, that's a good answer. So anything else? Any other benefits?
Uh, uh, Wait,
So one benefit you said that you can swap things without changing existing things. Uh,
scalability
yes, and anything else?
and simple support.
Okay,
We,
anything else?
that what I was thinking the first.
Okay. Um, do you know what inversion of control is?
Wait. I didn't know.
Okay, so now I'll go back from third person again. You explained dependency inversion principle quite okay. You forgot one more part. Why is it important? And it's important because it also allows you to have testable code. But about that in the next question. And about inversion of control, it's managing dependencies in a single place. Um, so you should look into inversion of control container, such as Unity, Autofac, Ninject, or other. And what it basically lets you do, it lets you register a dependency that you want in
Yeah,
a single
I mean
place.
it where say about scalability, but I didn't share the mind.
I wouldn't lump this with scalability. I would lump this maybe with maintainability as you
Yeah,
manage.
there only one place
Yeah.
where you do all
So can you tell me about the three scopes that you can register dependencies as?
three scopes.
Yes. Yes. Scopes. What are the scopes of dependencies?
Okay, let me think about. Oh, okay. I looked at the chart and you about trances and singleton and so on.
And can you is it familiar or you see it for the
Yeah,
first
yeah,
time?
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell me about those in more detail?
Yeah, I need build the seconds. Okay. So is three type of scopes: is transistor scope and singleton. Singleton, it's they created the dependency only one time, and for whole life of the application. So when it called, it's create, and that's only one object of this was created. Scoped create an object for each call, not call.
Request.
Request, right. For each request, it create an object of dependency, and transistence for each call.
Transient. Transient, it's called.
Transient, right.
Yes.
Sorry, transient for each call. Each
Yes.
call creates a new instance of dependency.
Okay, yes. So try to memorize this, it's important.
Yeah. I just not familiar with English
Okay,
names for each.
no worries. Let's move on with interview questions about testing now. If a company is decent, it will have some testing strategies, and well, code is tested in some way, one way or another. Worst case scenario, it gets tested in production.
Yeah, right.
So, what kind of tests do you know?
I'm not good with testing at all, but I know about unit testing, about mocking object and
All
some
right.
simple tests.
So tell me more about it.
So you want to test some of functions of your application, and you create for this another project where you can test that functionality. They have a class and which each method of this class is testing some of functionality of your application. It separates in three action: assert, act, arrange, where you describe the data; act, where you actually do the things you want to test in; and assert, where you can compare the result which you expect and which you actually get. About that, I want to add about mocking object, where you expect or class which you testing expect the other data or classes or other things. You can create a mock version of its data and give it to them. There
Okay.
are few frameworks for this.
So what three steps are essential for every test?
Assert, assert, act, and arrange, but in reverse.
Yes, yes. And is a unit test without mocking possible?
Again, please. I didn't.
Is it possible to do unit testing without creating mocks?
Is it possible to use a unit test?
To write a unit test without creating a mock. Can I unit test without mocking?
Yeah, of course, of course. If you don't need mock data, you didn't use it.
So, do you mock data? What do you mock?
For example, if my class which I want to test need data, some classes or other things to be created, I can encapsulate this data in a mock class and give it to my testing class.
So, what do you mock? Do you mock data or do you mock functionality?
Classes.
So, will you mock classes with have no methods?
Again, I mock only the behavior of the class which I need to create instance of my class, or which I need to be tested. I can mock in the methods or the value.
Okay.
So if I need that mocking class returns some data from the method, I can implement the returning the data from not
Okay.
method itself, but returning yet.
So, let's say you're testing class A, right? Which has method do, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And method do calls class B and C, which are both references dependency injected from class A, okay?
Okay.
So you need to test if by calling class A, classes B and C were also called instances of those classes. What do you do?
I'm mocking the classes B and C, and if they was created in
A, yes?
yeah
Injected
when
in A.
if they was injected in when I run an act, I write an act. I checking the if the instance are viable or they're null, and not an act in assert. I mean when I in act creating an instance of my A class.
Okay, can you be more specific? With what method are you going to check it? How do you
Again,
check it if they were called?
If they must be in my class, I won't check it for null.
Okay, but I didn't ask them to be in your class. I asked them if they
Again,
were called. If they were called from the do method.
in B and C class, we just create a new instance of each class, or what we do?
Um, B and C are unrelated, other than that they are dependencies. You don't test B and C. You test A and only method do in isolation, and you test that if it called B and C methods, any of their methods.
Oh, okay. So I want to create an instance of a class, and in my
How do
do
you create
methods,
it? How do you create it?
I create a mock of B and C and encapsulate it to abstraction and give
Oh,
it to my A when he was created. No, new A.
yes. The next step. So that's your arrange
Okay,
step.
so yeah. I created an A. I in act step I call the do method, and in that method, as I understand, they call the B and C data.
Yes. Yes.
So I check the data in assert. I check the data we received from B and C.
There is no data received. It's void method.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to. Anyway, I don't know. Okay, let me think about it.
Um. Okay. I'll give you 20 seconds to think about it.
I can implement the. Uh, okay, I didn't really understand. Okay, we call the BNC, which we have from dependency injection in our class, and we want to test BNC or A
We want to
for
test A if B and C was called the right methods.
and we can't actually modify BNC.
No, we cannot. Okay, so the answer is uh, with mocking framework like mockU, you can also verify if methods were called. So from your mock, you can say verify, and then with a lambda expression, specify which method are you verifying. So you can
Okay,
verify
I
if
didn't
method of
know.
B or C was called, and even how many times.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's probably not a junior level question. I don't, and that's not even an often question. This thing that I said is called white box testing, where you test not only input output but also the implementation, or in other cases where it's where you cannot test the output. That's the only thing that you're left with to test if key parts were called, because there is no output, but you still need to test it somehow.
Okay, I didn't get any example in my pet or actual project, and
Okay,
so I don't know.
give me a moment. Verify mockU. I'll give you an example how this looks like. Verify. Ba, ba, ba. Yeah. So it looks like this. You see mock, verify, and then what you called, with what arguments, and how many times.
Okay, so that's returns the boolean, right?
No. Uh, it basically, I don't know what it does under the hood, but if
Or it is in assert just ready.
in assert, this is assert.
Okay, I get it. Okay.
Yes. This is like a assert for how many times a function was called.
Okay, I get it. Thanks.
Yeah. So now we'll move on how you do work-specific stuff. So I guess for you, I cannot ask Angular questions because I don't really know it, but in general, I know it in high level. So can you tell me what Angular is?
It's a client UI framework which use in single page application. So it's full client application.
Okay, can you tell me what a single page application is?
Yeah, that's application which with only one page. Yeah, it's app where you uh, use real time with the server side, and you actually don't refresh full the page.
Mm-hmm.
You don't request HTML. You
Yes.
only request the data you need, and you update only data in ready HTML structures.
Yes. So for single page application, what is a very important part of it in terms of functionality? What is like the key bit that you wouldn't imagine it working? What do you think?
It's that not only client can call the server, and the server can call client too and send the data.
But when you change stuff on the pay from the server, when server updates stuff in the
Yeah, yeah,
page, you don't.
that what I mean. That server can call the client and send the data to him to say that something changed on the server. You don't need to refresh your servers, no, or you don't need to request data from server. Server can send data to you
All right.
directly.
Can you tell me what data binding is? That's the thing I was expecting, but my question was very vague, so it's understandable that you didn't answer. So can you tell about data binding? What it is? What is it? Data
Data binding.
data binding. Yes, data binding.
Okay, let me check. Oh, okay, I get it. Let's say you can bind some variable to a static field in your UI,
Must it be
and
static?
no, of course no. I mean, if it's let's say it's head h1, for example, you can store in this head variable, and you can update this variable when the server sends you new.
Yes. Okay, that's good enough. Then, since this basically general knowledge about Angular ends for me, an interviewer could ask you about alternative frameworks. Don't answer me this. And they could also ask about how exactly you do data binding in Angular and maybe essential fundamental parts of Angular, how you do stuff in it, because I know that Angular is very specific about it. It does things. If it was React, I could tell you more about it, but since it's Angular, I don't know that much. But not in my area of expertise, so I cannot judge you in terms of that.
Okay, okay.
So, do you know web services?
Yeah, a bit.
So what web services do you know? Web services
I mean, we
types.
actually we actually do the web service, or
Okay, do you know what RESTful is?
yeah, yeah.
So can you explain me?
The rest, it's a convention about the status codes, which you no status codes. It's about HTML headers. If they call you get, you shall you can understand the client wants to get HTML. It's if they call you post, you understand then that they send you data in this.
Okay, how does routing work in RESTful? Can you give me example? For example, if I asked you to fetch me all people or fetch me a single person, how would that look like in REST routing?
Okay, you can call just let's say some site slash people, and you can access all of the people, or you can call some site slash people slash ID3, for example, and you can get the specific people. As I understand you correct.
Yes, and so if you need to create a new person, what would you pass on top of the endpoint, on top of the URL?
You just send the data in form, for example, which with posts in headers. So if the you should on the server have a specific method which work with post requests, and when you call this method with post and header, you just you can work with it.
Uh,
Uh,
I spaced out a bit. Did you mention anything about body? Body.
Again, please.
Did you mention anything about body?
Request body.
Yes.
So some site slash people slash one.
That's URL. But let's say you want to create a new person.
Yeah. You can call the some site slash people slash one and get the data for the
Create.
first person.
You need to
Or
create.
you yeah. You can send the post request on the same URL, but you can work with it in a different way if you work with post request, and you call and you create the another way to work with post request on that URL.
Okay, will URLs be different or same?
No, they can be the same.
So /1 in the end?
Yeah.
So
So
what will
some
that
site
mean
slash
for
people slash one
So what will that
with
mean
get
to a new person? To a new person /1, what will that mean?
you want to update the data about first person.
Okay.
For example, if you already have a first person and you called this URI with post method, I think it's called to be updated data about this. Or you can call some site slash people, and you can call it to get about all people, or you can send a post request on this URI to create a new.
It's well, I would expect you to be more precise, that you send a JSON within a body of a post or patch or put, whatever, but you send a body to the same endpoint either with /1 if it's update, or without slash. Since I asked you to just create and not update, you shouldn't have mentioned /1. And yes. So last question about web API. Actually, two more questions. Where do you do dependency injection in web API in ASP.NET Core?
In ASP.NET Core, we describes dependency injection in the startup class.
Okay, and have you ever written middleware?
No, I use the default. I was
Mm-hmm.
fine with, but I know about some. Wait,
Mm-hmm. So maybe you know
about
where
come up.
middle.
Okay, okay.
Maybe you know where middleware is registered in ASP.NET Core. Configured.
In the startup class, in configured.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. Last question. What testing tools do you know? Debugging or testing tools?
Testing tools.
Mm-hmm.
I just use about testing the project as unit.
No, more like about debugging. What do you do to do
Oh, okay,
debugging?
okay, okay. It's just debug in Visual Studio, and if we say about web, I used Postman as well
Mm-hmm.
for the testing the request to the.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever used Fiddler?
No, I didn't use.
Do you know what Fiddler is?
No.
Okay. Uh, read a bit more about Fiddler. It's like Postman, but more featureful. It's more advanced, like advanced
Okay, so
Postman. Okay. Okay. One more question. Back to C Sharp in general. Uh, Actually, web also related. So if you had to cache something, what caching mechanisms do you know? How do you implement caching in C Sharp? What's the easiest way to implement it?
there's middleware for caching.
Mm-hmm. What if you had to so can you tell me about that middleware?
Again, please.
Can you explain how that middleware for caching works?
Okay. You in configure method you describe this middleware and you say what you want to store.
But specifically, caching, what middleware component is responsible for caching?
For example, it's can be memory cache,
Okay.
which stores the data in memory.
Okay. If you didn't use middleware or dependency injection or whatever, how else could you implement a cache by yourself, custom?
Okay, I just when I want to store something, I just say structure or class for this and store the data here. What I want each request.
And in what would you store it? What data structure would you pick for storing something that you want to cache?
Okay, it can be dictionary, maybe.
Yes, it's dictionary is like the most simple way of
Yeah, yeah,
caching
yeah.
something. Okay. Um, okay, and now I need to go for 15 minutes to eat, but in the meanwhile, they might ask you to also do a code review. So here is a piece of code. I linked it in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
And can you open this code and you have roughly 10-15 minutes to do a code review?
Okay.
And so basically open Notepad or similar and just write all the remarks on pieces of code that you don't like.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm back, we will review it. So uh, see you in 15 minutes.
Yeah, okay, okay.
All right, I'm back. How's it going?
Okay, I'm here.
Are you done?
I'm only looking at lesson 3 class,
Okay.
but I think I'm done with this.
Okay, can you send me on Discord the uh, file for code review?
Okay, I'm just print the things that I didn't like in the class, right?
Yes.
Or I should rewrite the class in the right way.
Just your remarks, comments.
Okay, but they on the Russian.
Oh, okay.
I can, but by the way, this not much the thing that I noticed, so I can say it just that I didn't like at the start. You didn't, this code didn't check the prompted values. So when you parse to int or to float, except you should check it. You should check the input parameters, string message when you write it. It can be null. It can be something else.
Will it fail if it's null?
No, of course, console wrote line just
So
prints the null.
why do you need to check it if it doesn't fail?
I think it's this is not the way that you expect from your program. Then, if they prompt a null in the console. Just to be sure that this message is not null. I don't know. I just do that as my default. I check all my input parameters in method.
Well, it's a good practice what you said, but in this case it wouldn't matter at all because if it's null, it will be empty. So it doesn't matter whatsoever. Maybe
Yeah,
it doesn't matter
but
whatsoever in this case. To be honest.
I mean you didn't want to prompt the null in the console, but okay, it's not the
It's not
critical,
null. It's
but
not null. It won't be printed as null. It will be printed as empty string.
yeah,
And since it's
yeah,
right,
yeah.
that won't happen. Nothing will happen. It will be ignored.
Okay, but you actually want to check the console read line
Yes,
to
this
be
one you do.
parsed.
Yeah, this one for sure. Why? So what happens if I type a space and then press enter?
Again, what you typed?
Space.
It's null reference exception in
No.
the
No.
runtime
Y-
or wrong argument exception.
yes. Um, it will say that it cannot convert into.
String to the int, yeah.
Yes. What else? So input validation is first thing that you didn't like. What is the second thing? Lack of input validation, rather.
It's I actually check the demo method in the and that's what all I can get by this.
So the rest is fine.
I need 1 more minute. And the last thing I want to mention, maybe I think you should check the number of persons because there can be a large number and it can be maybe too much while cycles. but again, it's not necessary.
Okay. So what do you think? Is it okay that this is static?
Again, please.
All methods in the lesson class are static. So
Yeah,
is
yeah. This I didn't see any bet in this because there are not field that you want to store between
okay.
the instances of this. So okay,
Yes, that is good. That's a good answer. Um, Other than probably, what about demo method?
okay. So simple method where you just cycle interrupt between the number and create new users, as I can mention,
Mm-hmm.
and write them info about them. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Um,
But okay, okay.
do you like optional? So in demo method we have int number of persons is equal to 1.
By default, yeah.
Do you like this? Would you write it as well like that?
Well, if you have option where there only one user can be, why not? And it's good because you use while with this parameter, and if you didn't describe the default uh, value of this type, you can get error.
Okay, if you go back to class lesson 3, what access modifier does it have? Or does
Private, private.
private? Are you sure?
By default, class private.
So what does it mean that the class is private?
Oh, okay, my bad.
It's not private.
Yeah, yeah, right. How the hell can be a private class? It's internal. As
Yes. So what does it mean? Well, you already explained, so I won't bother with this question. Okay, that's good enough.
The fields when you describe the fields with no access modifiers, it's private, and class it's internal.
Oh, okay. Line 38 or line 37.
Okay, okay.
Is this fine?
Yeah.
So a method that converts a string to string is
Convert string to string. You prompt surname and get the input in string format.
so it's a good name.
Again.
Is it a good name?
No, no, names are horrible, but
So could you pick a better name? How would you call it? This method converts
okay.
string to string.
I name it just get string. That's all.
Um, okay, so why do you need an input when you get a string? Would you expect to pass input when you get the string?
Maybe if I want to prompt the message before I get an
But from your name get string, is it clear that you prompt a message on top of that?
again, please.
Is it clear what will happen, that there will be that side effect in a function if you call it get string?
If I rename this method to get string, So yeah, it's fine for me. I think it's my method which I develop. I know what he can.
So did this person, it's his method which he developed, but you said it's horrible names, and I agree because, well, how I would call it, I'll just
They actually didn't convert anything to anything.
yes,
They
yes,
just take the read line and
yes.
return.
I would just call it prompt for string, which would mean that it gives a message and returns a string, something that is required from console. That's what prompt means to me. Ask and read. Um, okay, so now from a third person view as a reviewer, I would say it's good that you said not only bad things about code but also the good parts. Both things are as appreciated in a code review, so that's a good thing. Um, now, I won't ask you to write live code because that's too complex for me to check. So let's go back to two more questions that I think are worth asking.
Okay.
Um, and crap, I forgot about another thing. When you talked about yourself, I was supposed to ask more about your projects,
Uh
about
huh. Uh huh.
the technology you used in your projects. So, can we go back to those bits? And
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Okay.
so, you said there was a project for. Um,
There was actual two real
yes.
project
Mm-hmm.
that they used in not a paid project, but the apps which
Okay,
they people use.
that's fine.
So
Let me
first
ask
one,
specific questions. Did you use database?
yes,
So, what database did you use?
by default is MySQL.
Okay. And did you use raw SQL queries, stored procedures, or
Again, please.
did you use direct SQL, or did you?
No, it's ORM
Mm-hmm.
entity framework.
Okay.
First approach.
Okay. So I would follow up with what is code first, but I'm sure you know, so I won't ask that.
Again, please.
It's okay. I would follow up with a question: what is code first approach? But
Uh huh.
don't answer that. I know you know.
Okay. Okay.
Uh, um, so okay, database, MS SQL, and then uh, ORM entity framework, and so how did you structure a program?
So
High level architecture. What projects did you have, and did you write tests for it?
okay, so there was only three level domain model,
Okay.
under that logic, and third it's controllable with views. So it's like UI layer presentation. So in domain model, just models itself, entity models, and logic for store no, with entity framework. So it was a repository which has a bunch of methods like get all, get someone, get someone specific.
Okay. Go on about other layers.
Okay, on logic layer we have logic. Uh, we modify the data. We verify. Uh, we do some math and other things. What I want to do with data. So domain layer just about data. Uh, Logic layer about the work with the data, and presentation layer just about with uh, give the data to user. So it's about generate HTML and other.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in your project, did you use a version of control?
Yeah, use GitHub.
In not versioning of code, but inversion of control.
Again, please.
Versioning of code. Sorry, inversion of control. Inversion of control. Did you use an dependency injection? Did you use inversion of control container? Unity,
When
autofac, or
oh
default?
oh I use default dependency injection mechanism in the
So in startup class, right?
yeah.
Okay. Method, not class. Okay. Uh,
But I use only one service is so repository which I use for give the data about repository to
so how long did it take you to make that project, and was it as expected?
Okay, it's not simple project, classic root operations, and the complex task for me that project about map, Google Map API, and I didn't good familiar with Google Map API was. So classic root operation I fast.
Okay. Um, and about technology, let's jump back to ASP.NET.
Mhm.
So, have you written custom attributes, or do you know what attributes are?
Oh no, I didn't write custom attributes to my code. Just default was fine for me. It's small
Okay.
application. It's don't involve complex logic or
Right. Okay. Two more questions, and we'll be done. Do you know what iAction filter is?
I action filter.
Yes.
No.
Okay. So you don't know. I'll answer for you. It's an attribute which you can put above a method, and it will do something before or after that method executes. So
Oh,
before or after a request starts.
yeah. I know about the attribute, the type of attributes, but I didn't use. I just read about it in my study plan, but
It's
I
yeah,
didn't.
it's very specific. It probably won't be asked. Next question, which you'll probably be asked. Um, so in controller methods, we can return in ASP.NET Core. We can return three things. We can either return a type as is, for example, a string,
Mm-hmm,
or we can return iAction result,
mm-hmm,
or we can return action result of type T.
mm-hmm.
So what's the difference between the three?
Okay, so string, just return string. So it's not an HTML, another thing. Action result, I action results interface, which can be all things. So it can be HTML result, it can be file result, it can be anything that implements this interface. So it's actually just result. And action T result, I didn't use at all, and I can't tell much.
So again, why should I use iAction result if I can just return a string?
But you don't want to return a string, you want to return an HTML page which involved your view mechanism with razor page with others.
Okay, so what if I return a view instead of
Again,
what if I return a view instead of action result?
action result is basic for view result. So if you say it's a view result, you can return only view. And if you say action result, you can return and file result too. So you can just return.
Well, what I was expecting to be as an answer is that in iAction result, you can return more than just one type, and you can return HTTP status codes on top of
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
and
mean,
other things.
yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
action result is basic for the other results, and it can be anything. So
Okay, and I think that's enough for the interview. So let's summarize things.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, so I think you'll do great during your interview. This is good stuff, good level. Um, I definitely answered my questions like 80 or 70%, which is good enough for a junior level for sure. So I think you will get the job. Just read a bit more about um, how you can monitor HTTP requests, so more about Fiddler. Um, then read about solid principles a bit more,
yeah,
specifically about abstraction of OP as well. Um, um, Try to practice unit testing. Uh, Practice the part that you didn't know about, verify method calls, and try to practice talking about your drawbacks
yeah, yeah, yeah.
in a
That's
way that is not directly putting them as bad things, but try to put them in a good way, even as a drawback. So be careful with how you word things, how you phrase stuff, because
yeah, yeah,
it can be the same thing said in different ways can mean completely different things, even though essentially it's the same. So on top of this, what I didn't ask you, they might ask for live coding or problem solving, and those two things are just up to you how you do it. But there is a little hack for live coding. Do it in test-driven development. Do you know what TDD is?
yeah. When you start from these tests and you
Yes,
just write the functions to pass it.
yes. So do that. If they ask you to do live coding, start from a test and talk out loud and talk with them. And
Just
by
didn't try it. TDD.
yes, but it works very well in job interview. You basically, while you talk with your interviewer, you can ask them questions about requirements, specification, and as you ask those questions, you basically fill in the missing details in your test, since it's trivial to write a test essentially. And then you're just left with implementing tests. So as you ask interviewer those questions, uh, you're left with some free time to think at the same time about how you're gonna implement it. Um, so it might look like it's gonna take too much time, but it will be like 5 extra minutes for writing a test maximum, and then you just implemented it. And they will love it if you do it like this, because that's best practice. Um, and yeah, also keep in mind how you name things for tests. It's a completely different naming scheme.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know the conversion.
Okay, so you're good. Overall, you're good. So don't worry, you'll get the job.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. It's really maybe best experience in English for me at
Mm-hmm.
all time because I don't even spoken at English at all.
Mm-hmm.
Just write and other. Thanks a lot. Thanks you for your recommendation. I'm really know much about myself, and I really I see I can see my misses in my head with knowing of C sharp. I know where I can now go in to learn it. And thanks again. Great.
No problem. Good luck
You're a
in
good
your
person.
interview.
And you good luck. Thanks.
Yes. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you all for watching and see you.